Hello, hello, everybody. Hopefully, you guys are doing blessed today. I want to do something a little bit different this time, which is, kind of give you guys the opportunity to get a bit of a market overview, right? Kind of draw up some, bigger time frame ideas, speak on them, and what we could be looking, for this coming week. So yeah, guys. So. First and foremost, I'd like to start off with you guys, going into, Forex Factory so we can go ahead and review the news events for this week because it's a pretty big week for news events, guys, right? So first and foremost, this week we have, tomorrow a lot of news events going on. We have ISM Manufacturing and we have Fed Chairman Powell speaking, which always is going to shake up the market happening at 1 p.m. EST. That's definitely going to be my focus for tomorrow, right? More USD news on Tuesday. Jolt's jobs opening, typically not the craziest volatility, but we'll see what ends up happening there. USD, and then we have big, CAD news, which is going to be our rate statement. We'll see if, the Canadian government decides to, or the Canadian Fed, really, the Bank of Canada, decides to, up interest rates or not. So we shall see. And there's going to be a press conference right after. More, USD news. Sheesh, lots of red folders this week, guys. Thursday we got Euro, and unemployment claims, right? So we got unemployment claims going on again. And then on Friday, all right, we have the biggest news event of the month, which is NFP. Okay, guys. So NFP week is a very special week. All right. Typically, we want to be very, very careful in terms of like where we're going to be, taking positions, whether we're going to be holding them or not, right? So what I'd really recommend you guys is like, even though like in this case, like I've never seen so many like really so many red folders happening and big red folders too happening before NFP. But regardless, if I was you guys, I'd really just look to secure some like a little bit of instead of trying to get like home run trades, right? Go ahead and try and hit some smaller trades, right? Don't not really trying to hold for too long. Once we get some profit under our belt this week, maybe we can start to, get a little more aggressive and start to hold a little bit longer. But my plan for every NFP week is, try and get some solid like, base hits instead of trying to hit the home run, if you know what I'm saying with the baseball analogy. But yeah, that's typically my advice for NFP week is, try and start slow, catch some day moves, right? So some intraday moves, and then we could try and find the move of the week, closer to the NFP day, right? Because obviously, typically this is where we really end up seeing the big moves happen. So, whether we position ourselves the day before or the day of NFP, that's basically where I would want to really look to see like, okay, can we start to get aggressive during those times? So yeah, we'll see how it ends up going, right? But that's going to be that's going to be the outlook for this week news wise. All right. When it comes to talking about the first thing we always look at is like US dollar, right? When it comes to the charts. So, a couple things that I've really been looking at and like noticing is like it does look like we have recently had a potential redistribution happen on dollar, right? Especially because we've broken down so far. We're still not looking strong or anything like that, even though we've had a recent like, push to the upside last week. I don't really think it looks the strongest, and we'll talk about why in a second, but the biggest thing here is just that, where are we going to find our potential entries for sales, right? For me, obviously, my most ideal opportunity for sales is going to be inside here, where we really have the top of our redistribution. We have this institutional candle that was printed to the upside. This would really be the most ideal zone for me to go ahead and actually look for long-term sell positions on dollar. All right. Personally, when it comes to dollar on like a weekly point of view, I think that, it's not unrealistic to start to see, price have like a really bigger time frame, push to the downside, right? Have a bigger pullback down. And basically kind of having our retracement from this whole impulse to the upside, and then maybe from there we can see it recover. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking, right? So if we're gonna look at the fib and stuff, we could still go a little bit down to, really get to the 70%, 78%, the 88% retracement, right? This is really our extreme area down here. So we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. But for right now, I'm still bearish on dollar, right? And personally, it's like just really finding an entry, right? Um, Obviously we've been, selling dollar this whole push to the downside as we've been, recognizing redistribution after redistribution. And I think that the next one might have just happened. So we'll see if we can, play that again or not. But one thing that I'm definitely noticing is the likelihood of us really getting a pullback. I think a pullback is going to be really, really possible. I think we will get another buy to the upside here on dollar. Why do I say that? Because I can see that we have a lot of gaps, right? So, we could see how price gapped from here to here, right? We could see how we have a gap over here as well, right? Let me pull this a little higher so we can see it better. Sorry, guys. Right? So we have this gap up in here, right? We have more imbalances over here as well. So there's a lot of gaps that we can really fill to the upside. So I think that there might be a rebalancing move, right? To go ahead and rebalance either this gap here. This is going to be my first potential target and idea, right? And zone that we could see it reverse. And then the second zone is going to be up here in this area there, right? So I think that a rebalancing move is potentially coming for us to again get that push to the downside, right? So yeah, I mean, like when it comes to looking for like that, like obviously if we don't get like a buy setup, right, and we just end up coming up into these zones, then of course I'm gonna love to, take the sells in that position. But I think there's possible we might be able to, position ourselves in a buy. Pretty like I don't know if it's gonna be here specifically. But I do think that, it's possible that we do end up getting a buy to the upside to go in and refill all of those zones there. It's just about seeing like where price comes into when it comes to a lot of these major news events that are coming this week. So, obviously here's a potentially good zone because we do see like a sweep that happens that takes out like these lows over here. And then we have already seen a second, manipulation as well, right? So two manipulations that have brought us up. The only thing that really, has shies me away from like taking buys specifically in this area is the fact that when we actually broke the high that created the low, we did so fast, so impulsively, and just completely rejecting back down. If we had like really held above this high, I would have been a lot more confident to actually see that next push to the upside happen. But for right now, with the way that this high was created, I don't really like this low too much anymore. So I think there could be a possibility, like if I end up seeing price come down, actually sweep this low, right? So sweep that low there. Then from there, looking for a potential like short-term pullback, right? So maybe looking for buys to find a short-term pullback from there would be kind of like my idea. Whoops. So like, finding the sweep, looking for the mitigation of that sweep, and then finding, that pullback and then using these gaps as a target. Because I do think it's very likely that, we do fill at least some of these gaps, right? There's a lot of gaps to rebalance. So that's kind of my thought process for like the first move that I really want to make on dollar, right? Although I do want to sell this thing long term, I do think that a rebalancing move is coming. And so all I really need is just evidence of that, right? I want to see institutional candles that can potentially point me in a bullish direction. And then from there, look to execute off of those candles, right? That's going to be the ideal part of that. So, that's really the idea there. So obviously, we have our entry models that we talk about in our boot camps and everything like that, right? Our first entry model being our, five phases entry model, right? So seeing five phases in previous zones that we're looking for, right? Seeing Wyckoff schematics happen or seeing institutional candles get created is really going to be, what I'm going to want to see on the smaller time frame to kind of align with that bigger picture bias of what I'm seeing on dollar, where, again, I do think that there's a lot of imbalance that needs to be filled. All right, guys. So yeah, so let's see how we can kind of take advantage of this, right? So, when it comes to a potential short-term dollar buy bias, I would really like to take advantage of it through using, like indices, right? So when it comes to some to things like indices, I think we starting to see some really interesting price action, right? And I also do think that, while I do think that indices are like at its bottom, like this is going to be the bottom here of indices, right? And we're going to see that next push to the upside happen. I do also think that, we can definitely make the case of the fact that this is looking pretty overextended when it comes to really just seeing a one impulse, right? Like we obviously had like this pullback that happened here. And ever since then, like price has essentially just been moving in this like a straight line, right? Holding that lower time frame price action really beautifully. And not really giving any higher time frame pullbacks. So that's what I'd really like to see when it comes to things like, NASDAQ, when it comes to things like US 30, right? If we can just end up getting, like a pullback, right? Obviously not necessarily, this is like extremely extended and exaggerated, right? I don't think we're going to get like a huge dump or anything, but I do think that a pullback is in order. And I think that, and we're going to talk for about a couple reasons why, right, from both a fundamental perspective and from a chart perspective. But um, but yeah, like, when I look at things like NASDAQ, for example, obviously we could see recently we made this low that went ahead and created this high, right? But we can also see that below that low, there is like actual gaps that have not been filled yet on NASDAQ, right? Let me see if they've been filled here on S&P. No, they haven't been filled on S&P either, right? So, we have gaps that are yet to be filled, right? We've also started to see like signs of distribution, right? So like, in that previous week, we had like, three drive pushes to the upside. We ended up reaccumulating over here. And we end up seeing like NASDAQ go ahead and create a new high, but we can see that this high is very short-lived, right? We failed to really make, again, like kind of like with that dollar example, it's like we failed to really hold above this high and really hold that structure and show that strength, right? We really just saw, honestly, price look more like a sweep than a potential higher high. So, we see that NASDAQ has done that. We see that US 30, actually ended up creating a lower high. And when we look at, S&P, right, we could see that this one also created a higher high. And again, same kind of idea, this did it with just an extremely impulsive push to the upside. It looks more like a sweep than a potential sign of strength. So I'm starting to think that, with what we're seeing with indices, like this pullback is going to come sooner rather than later. And like, I don't know if you guys are really updated on the whole, tariff situation and stuff. But, just recently, like, right after basically we saw this sweep happen, right after we saw this buy to sell motion, Trump starts talking about, oh, like, China has like violated our trade agreements. We're gonna go back into the tariffs and like this and that, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, that can definitely be something to, cause some sharp pushes to the downside, potentially. And again, like just for the short term, right, to kind of give us a higher time frame pullback, right? Because like, having just one impulse all the way up, basically, like when it comes to this, right? Like I think that we can expect, at least a pullback to happen, especially when we're getting like signs of distribution and stuff like that, on some of these pairs. But I do think, again, guys, long term, are we going to go to all-time highs? Yes, I do believe we're going to go to all-time highs on S&P. I do believe we're going to go to all-time highs on NAS and US 30. Because again, I do also believe that dollar bearish is coming, right? But I think that if we do get that pullback for, pushes to the upside on dollar, short term, I think indices can end up, you know, potentially losing some steam and continuing to come down. So how are we going to take advantage of that? Well, I would say again, out of all the indices, US 30 looks the most bearish, just because of the fact that, it isn't quite as close to its highs, right? Like we could see here, like US 30, had a much tougher time trying to get back up to there. Like we can see US 30, like, from the highs here, right? It's like what, 5.3% away from all-time highs, right? And then we look at something like NASDAQ at its high, right? We have NASDAQ at its high, which is only 1.8% away from its all-time highs, really not far at all. And then S&P as well, same thing, right? That's like really close. Right, looks like it's only 2.5%, right? So US 30, when it comes to this push to the upside, hasn't been as pronounced compared to those other two. And like, also seeing that divergence where like, S&P and NAS, obviously made that high there, right? I think that the fact that US 30 held here also makes it look like it's a little bit more like bearish than the rest of them, right? So the two main zones that I'd be looking for on US 30 would be, for a price to pretty much go here, right? Back up into where this lower high was created, and hopefully from there, give us a entry model that we talked about, one of those three entry models, so we can actually align the entry model with our potential bias, or to go ahead and have a sweep, right? Have to go ahead and have a sweep to the upside, right? Take out those highs as well, the way that we did on NASDAQ and S&P, and then from there end up seeing the push to the downside happen, right? But since there was divergence, I think there is some pretty good chance that, NASDAQ and S&P actually end up holding these highs. So, if we can even end up getting some potential, imbalance fills up in here for NASDAQ, that could be good. So I think that basically this is what I'm thinking, right? If US 30 ends up holding this high and coming to the downside, right, I think that NAS and S&P will probably do the same, right? Obviously we would expect those highs to be created the same way. And if not, right, if not there, then and we end up seeing the second situation on US 30, we can look for institutional candle creation model above these highs, right? To then sell off. And then, I would say like, NASDAQ or S&P might end up also, taking their highs for one more drive, right? Maybe have like a UTAD type of thing and then continue to come to the downside. Um, But yeah, although we recently had this reaccumulation, guys, I just think that the way this high was created gives me those signs of manipulation that I would want to see to go ahead and look for that push to the downside. So personally, what I'm calling out for you guys this week is like, can we actually see these, indices sell starts to play out? So yeah, guys, that's pretty much my call out there for indices, right? What else am I really looking for bigger picture wise, right? So the purpose of these outlooks is going to be to just stick to the bigger picture for these, right? So the other thing I'm looking at is potential gold buys, right? So, obviously we recently had a really nice, like manipulation down that happened on the bigger time frame on gold. We can see over here, right? Like we had like all this buildup of lows here that was being created, right? Price quickly sweeps that with just a couple of candles before then seeing like, obviously a really nice recovery, right, to the upside, right? So I think that this could be a potential, low for gold here, for us to go ahead and attack, new highs. And then even looking at, recent price action, right? I think we recently have had that, reaccumulation. So one thing that, I had been looking for was for the potential buys here on gold, right? And we've already started to really react away from it. So if we can end up getting a pullback down a little bit deeper on gold, like maybe into this zone here, to look for, the next buy to the upside, I think that, they would make a lot of sense to see that happen on gold, especially after having seen this reaccumulation play out. We've had this sweep down happen and everything. So let's see again, like if during New York session, during London session, we can get back into, these zones or these zones for, the next push to the upside. Hopefully we can, right? And then when I look at something like silver, right, same kind of idea, right? I was kind of looking at how we had this recent sweep here. But by the way things are looking, honestly, we might even get one more push to the downside, right? So if we can even sweep this low here on silver, right? I think it would look good. There's a possibility we don't, right, even get to do that. But, one thing that I'm just seeing here is like, look at all this liquidity. We have like those highs there. We have like all these highs here that are being created. So whether it's here, right, in the current zone, like whether we just like, again, just start to trade away from here, or if we actually sweep, I think that using these as a target is going to be a good potential idea, right? So I think that buys are coming. And I think that, they're going to come sooner rather than later as well. Obviously, even though dollars coming to the downside, gold and silver have really done their thing, especially during times of uncertainty like we're in now, when it comes to we don't know like about, trade deals and stuff like that. So yeah, that's really the idea there, guys, right? So silver, potentially going the same direction as gold, with its own reaccumulation, right? So yeah, fingers crossed on that because again, if silver, can if silver does end up sweeping this low here, then obviously gold will probably end up sweeping this, low here, right? And then, maybe we can get an extreme retracement, down into here. That could be nice too, right? So we shall see, we shall see. But I do like the way that gold is looking, as a whole, right? It's just about finding our entry, looking to see where the order flow is starting to be created, and I think it is starting to get created. There is some signs of it, right? So. Yeah, if not here, then we'll see what ends up happening in that next area down here. So yeah, we shall see, we shall see. But I am bullish on gold. I'm bullish on indices as well, but I just think short-term sells, get S&P down to its gaps, get Nas down to its gaps. That's really going to be my idea and my focus for this week when it comes to the assets there, right? Just give us a pullback, right? And yeah, so that's really the idea, guys, for what I'm going to be looking for as a whole with a lot of these pairs, right? Hopefully we can end up getting some short-term dollar buys so that we can set ourselves up for long-term swing sells in these areas, right? So, however that ends up happening, right? If we end up getting, a sweep here, which is what I really hope for, right? That would be really my most ideal opportunity to potentially get up into those premium areas. So then I can go ahead and look for my long-term sells to reach down a little bit lower. And maybe we can even hedge that position, right? Maybe we can see like, okay, if buy starts to play out from down here, right? Maybe we can like, still hold those buys even though we look for sells. So then obviously even if pricing ends up continuing to come higher, we'll still end up in more profit thanks to the risk to reward factor, right? So yeah, see how it ends up playing out, guys. Right. But that's kind of my quick little market overview for you guys, right? I'll talk about one or two more pairs that I think can really play out. And then we'll go from there. So one pair I've been talking about for like weeks now, is EURJPY, right? I think here on the daily, we're super getting ready to sell off, right? We had this really nice manipulation move right here that we can see that ends up coming right back down, right? We got wicks to the downside that we could potentially target, right? Distribution type price action there. And then during recent price action, we've had, these highs get created, we sweep those highs, and now we're starting to sell off. So it's possible, that this sell-off continues. Um, hopefully we can get, again, like another retracement. I mean, that would be the most ideal, right? But honestly, with the way that we did this, like this whole push to the upside, it really is possible that we just continue to dump off, from there and start to head towards those lows, head towards these gaps here. And I think like even when we talk about the weekly time frame, like, there's a lot of liquidity down in here, right? So, and I see this across the board with a lot of JPY pairs. So it looks like Japanese yen starting to gain some strength. So we'll let that, continue to see if we can, position ourselves with that. It does look like here on the weekly, right? Our last candle was like a potential mitigation candle coming right back in. So during this week, to see this come completely bearish, we'll see if that can end up being, the prediction for this week, right? So we'll come back to this later on and see, if EURJPY ends up creating that push down. But I think it's likely, guys. So try and position yourselves, all right, however you guys can, right? If we end up, retracing or whatever it might be, or if you just want to take a position now. Another thing I'm looking at is potential Euro NZD buys, right? So it's just about where, right? Like one thing that I think we're definitely seeing with Euro NZD is like a lot of liquidity being built up to the upside, right? A lot of sellers are being created, and I think that buyers like, have been consistently been, getting hurt for a while here, right? Like we can see all these previous lows that are just consistently being swept, right? So, we can end up seeing maybe like a break, right? We see price come back, and then from there, right, maybe we can actually start to see the walk back up. So I'm even looking at this zone here where we're in right now, Euro NZD. I had set an alert in this zone. I don't know why it didn't go off, but it could be very possible that, this manipulation from last week could be a zone that we could continue to react from this week, right? If we're talking about from an order flow perspective, it does look good because we did have this, we did see price break, right? Now we've seen price break twice, so it definitely does look like a five phases model that I would like to see like already, like, so let's check out this lower time frame. Could even be a trade to call out, to be honest. Um, yeah, honestly, even right now, it's looking pretty good. Right, so if we were to go for a position like this, how would that look? Oof. Lot of big pip stop loss though. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, right? That's very, very big. If we cover this whole zone here, right, we can obviously know that, this whole push to the upside, sorry, this whole push to the downside is what really creates the break. So this is where our stop at minimum is gonna have to be. So because we, obviously that's gonna be an extremely big stop. It is a bit risky, but when we also look at the fact that again, this is a very higher time frame play, right? Like we could potentially be seeing like these highs over here get taken, right? That's still a 1 to 4 risk to reward ratio, from the current price that we're at right now. So yeah, could definitely make a case for this, but I'm gonna drop this as quickly as possible so y'all can make your own decisions on this. But this is something that I was personally looking to, call out. And now price is in the zone. So that's that. But those are the two, really Euro positions that I like that are still kind of cooking. And yeah, that's pretty much all I'm looking at though, guys. Not gonna lie. I'll go ahead and let you guys know if I see anything else. But yeah, that's really my focus for now is like, waiting, right? Seeing what dollar can do, seeing if we can get any kind of order flow play to like, fill in this gap over here, fill in the gap over there. And then, when it comes to indices, right, looking to align it with that and then see if we can get like a sell opportunity a little bit higher, right, during New York session. So fingers crossed, guys. Hopefully this overview goes well. And yeah, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the value. Hopefully you guys learned a little bit some. And yeah, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace out. Much love.